All right, because I want to talk about Bonhoeffer is a book that Eric Metaxes wrote, and we were talking just briefly in the break there about how accurate that story is. So I'm going to ask you, for the people that may not know that story, and I suggest you go out there and get the book Bonhoeffer by Eric Metaxes, and tell people real quickly why it's so applicable today.
Yeah, I wrote the Bonhoeffer book, came out in 2010, right? And I'm talking about it more now than I was 10 years ago, because it is dramatically, unfortunately, relevant to exactly where we are. In retrospect, I believe the Lord called me to write that book prophetically for this season. I didn't know it at the time, but it's the story of a man who, because of his faith in Jesus, he was a German pastor, began to see that the church in Germany needed to stand against Hitler. Now, this is, let's be fair. Most Germans and German Christians didn't understand who Hitler was in 1933, 34, 35. It's very easy for us now to know who he was. But if you had eyes to see, and you had your ear on the ground, so to speak, you could see what was coming. Bonhoeffer knew that Hitler was not just the enemy of God's chosen people, but he was the enemy of the church. And if the church did not use its power, it had great cultural power in Germany when Hitler took power. The church had power. He said, if you don't use it now, if you don't stand up now, the window's closing. You have a season where you can fight this. And one of the reasons it's so dramatically relevant today, I'm sorry to say, is that the American church is in the same position.
Exactly.
You have a level of ignorance combined with a passivity, combined with cowardice, that says we don't want to stand up against the wokeism or this or that. Let that guy get canceled. I'm just going to hang back here and quote unquote preach the gospel, right?
Right.
Well, there were many in Germany in the church that said, we just want to preach the gospel. Romans 13, we have no business speaking out against this. And Bonhoeffer was trying to get them to wake up, because he knew, just as we now know, there is a short season, there's a window where you have freedom, you have money, you have abilities, you have opportunities. If you do not use them now, in a couple of years, they will be taken away from you. So if you've got a few $1 million you want to use for God's purposes or the purposes of freedom, you better use it now, because the government may take it away from you in a couple of years. You have freedom, you have a voice. If you don't use that voice now, you will be muzzled in a few years. Use that voice in the battle right now. Otherwise, we will lose the battle. And your ability to quote-unquote preach the gospel, and I say quote-unquote because I think, what gospel, what weak, useless gospel are you preaching that you are not speaking truth to power as you're supposed to do prophetically? You're not calling out evil. You're not doing any of these things when the government is imposing a secularist, diabolical vision on public schools everywhere in the culture. You're keeping your mouth shut, Mr. Pastor, because you say, well, I want to preach the gospel. What gospel are you even preaching where you're able to keep your mouth shut about those things?